Hi, Lucy. Where are you from?
Hi, how you going?
Yeah, where are you calling in from, Lucy?
I'm in Melbourne at the moment. Yeah, so I got to escape to Perth for 2 weeks over the last lockdown, which was such a blessing and very lucky.
Yeah, it's wonderful, the things we value now. Hello, Charmaine. Thank you so much for coming in.
How's my audio? Is that working?
It's working. Yes, beautiful.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. And at the moment, I think, Charmaine, you're getting the award for being the furthest away from most of us.
Always the way.
Yeah. And what time is it there?
It is 3 o'clock.
Wow. Well, at least we didn't make you get up early.
I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
Oh, no, it shouldn't be that way. It should be us getting up for you occasionally. What can we do for 1 minute?
Bridget, have you got people in a waiting room?
No.
You can describe your granddaughter.
Well, the best baby. No, actually, she's, I try very hard, especially, you know, the more I learn about IVF and assisted reproduction, I try very hard not to say this baby looks like, right? But I pick her up and it's just picking up her mother like 30 years ago. And I'm trying not to say, oh, but yeah, which is lovely to be back there thinking about all that. So.
The photos were beautiful, Kath. Thanks for sharing them.
Thank you. I do like to dominate every meeting for the last 2 days with talk about her. But even for me, this is a bit much. And how's your leg going, Amanda?
I don't know. I don't know what to say.
You're going to show us? Is it looking any different from the moon boot? No.
Oh, Amanda.
Amanda, would you mind? I was talking to Amanda earlier today about preparedness and the things that you don't prepare for. Would you?
Oh, yeah. So preparedness queen, right? Because it's what I do. I could have been without power for months, no problem at all. But when power goes here, I have no water because I'm on tank water. And I have a fireplace so I can burn wood, but I'm not weight bearing and I'm on crutches, so I can't carry a bucket of water or carry a piece of wood. So all of my plans for storms and cyclones and everything went out the window when I couldn't carry anything. So yeah, I got stuck here in the cold with no water. Not really. I had somebody come and rescue me. They found me sitting on the couch last Thursday night, wrapped in a blanket with a beanie, with a head torch on, reading a magazine with condensation blowing out of my mouth. The phones were out, so I couldn't call anyone. Anyway.
Hello and welcome, Nicole and Sheri. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on our panel. And hello, Anne again. Hello. And g'day, Sally, Jackie, Bron, and we've already, Chris, hello. So nice to have you all here. Seeing this as a conversation a little bit different from our normal conversation series, it'd be lovely to have everyone keep their camera on and feel free to join the conversation at any time. Besides, you're all good looking, so. Oh, Nicole, you're having problems. Okay. Yep.
No, I'm fine now. It's come through. Yeah.
Oh, good. Welcome. So we are recording now, okay? And hopefully to put this up on our conversation series. We're getting some great topics up on that series, so make sure you have a look. So I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we are working, playing, living, and pay our deepest respects to elders past, present and emerging. The All Network recognises the resilience, strength and pride of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. I myself, I'm in Footscray in Melbourne, so I'm on the land of the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong people, and land is not the word, it's a significant meeting place for those mobs, and not owned in the traditional sense that I understand ownership. So I really enjoy knowing that fact about where I am today. So it's so exciting to have everybody here. And I think we're going to really regret that we're only here for an hour, because we've got the most amazing group when I look across the screen. So we've got 4 people that we're going to focus our original discussion on, and then we're hoping people will jump in and add to the questioning. So in reverse alphabetical order, I'm just going to really briefly introduce you and get you to answer a question that talks more about your background and experience. So we've got Sheri Bruinhout in Victoria, and Sheri's the Executive Director of Housing Pathways and Outcomes for the Department of Families, Fairness and Housing. And so it'd be really interesting to get her perspective on the impact of COVID. Going backwards, we've got Jamiee, who's in Queensland, and she's the National Senior Project Officer for Recovery in Emergency Services for Red Cross. So she's also, most amazingly, thank you, the Queensland OR chapter lead. So it's lovely to have you here. Thanks, Jamiee. Another chapter lead, can you believe we've got 3 chapter leads here, maybe more coming in. So Nicole, welcome. Nicole's in New South Wales, and she's the Assistant Commissioner Director for New South Wales State Emergency Services, and as I said, the New South Wales chapter lead. And we've also got Charmaine Dalton in Western Australia, who's Quality Safety and Risk Manager for Rata Safety, and she's the Western Australia chapter lead. So it's just amazing to have that breadth across the states, but also a little bit different lenses to look at what's happening in the COVID at the moment. So going in that order, I would just love to hear from each of those people a little bit about how you are impacted, or how your work is impacted by COVID. How has it impacted your role, both volunteer and paid work, and the balance with other responsibilities? So Sheri, would you like to go first, please?
I'd love to go first. I'll also acknowledge that we're meeting on Aboriginal land, always was and always will be, and I pay my respects to Elders past, present and emerging, and to say how lovely, and thank you for inviting me tonight, and how lovely it is to meet these amazing women doing awesome work. So I work for Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, and I've got to say how lovely it is to work for a government department that has the word fairness in it. It's really special. I spend most of my days, I oversee a portfolio that looks after the responses to homeless Victorians across Victoria. So that's a $440 million a year social service system that's delivered by about 150 agencies. And I also oversee the operational policy for our public housing across Victoria as well. So I guess when I think about COVID in Victoria, we've had a really interesting time over the last year and a half or so in Victoria, and none so impacted more than people experiencing homelessness and people in public housing. You know, we've had over 12,000 people experiencing homelessness come into hotels during COVID, during many months of our lockdown, so that they can stay safe and reduce the risk of transmission of COVID from both themselves and the larger community. And also in public housing, we had the hard lockdown of 9 high-rise public housing towers last year. So it's been a sector that's been very impacted by the health emergency over the past year and a half or so. But also, I guess, we might just see if we can pop Julie on. I don't know if you can. I'm more a Teams girl than a Zoom girl, so I'm not sure if you can mute people on Zoom. I don't know what I'm going to do when I come back into the office and you can't mute people in real life. I don't know what happens then. I think I'll have to be polite. So the other, I guess, I spent a good part of last year being the State Commissioner for COVID responses in high-risk accommodation settings. So that was essentially looking at people who found it very difficult to comply with the Chief Health Officer's orders of wearing a mask and remaining at home and abiding by some of the lockdowns. So having a lot of powers for directions during that period of time as well. So yes, Victorians by and large have had a really interesting year. I guess what I would say in terms of the impact of that, Kath, is while COVID has been, I think, really challenging for the portfolios that I work in, and for me personally, I'm a single mum with 3 kids trying to do homeschooling, God help us. You know, so lots of challenges in lots of ways, but in some ways it's been a really fabulous opportunity to really shine a light on some of those things that are just plain wrong. You know, those injustices that we have where, you know, a family where we had a mum with 3 kids and those kids were turning up to school without a mask. So it got reported into me as a non-compliant individual. And so getting in touch. And as it turned out, this mum with 3 kids was living in a single car garage with a single light bulb and 2 power switches, no running water, no carpet on the floor, corrugated iron on the walls. And she was paying over $400 a week for 2 bunk beds in a single car garage and had been doing that for a long time. But those kids were going to school with, you know, nicely clean clothes and lunches, and she was doing her best, but she couldn't buy masks. And what COVID did was shine a light on the fact that there are many Victorians living in poverty, living in conditions that we just find unacceptable. And COVID really shone a light on that. So for all of the terrible arguments about homeschooling and staying at home, some of the really good things that came out of it is that we were able to really wrap some supports around people who were just existing in this kind of quiet desperation. And COVID really was an opportunity to bring some emergency responses around them and bring them into the service system in a way that they don't have to survive like that anymore. So, you know, good and bad that came out of last year, I think, and you know, an opportunity to do what's right and do what's fair, and to leverage government funding in that direction. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Sheri. I think that shine a light and the opportunities that have come out of COVID are really important. And can I ask Nicole, could you go next and give us your perspective, especially from the YWCA, around COVID and the impact on your role, please?
Yes, so just as a bit of an introduction, so I now work for the New South Wales State Emergency Service as Assistant Commissioner, but was during the outbreak of COVID working for YWCA as a non-government organisation, and also in an area that had been significantly impacted by bushfires, floods, COVID at the same time, then floods again. So the broader impact on that. The role that I did in YWCA was to lead case managed teams of team members who worked with members of the public who were experiencing domestic and family violence, and also who were working in the school system, education system, with disadvantaged and disengaged youth. So first of all, I suppose working from that perspective, in all disasters or natural disasters, whilst domestic and family violence goes up, the reporting goes down. So that was significantly experienced, not just from COVID, but during the bushfires and then with the floods. And then as soon as the disaster or there's a level of normality that actually occurs in the community, the reporting starts to go back up in that space. So some of the challenges, I suppose, experienced by the team who were particularly working with people who were experiencing domestic and family violence, and not just existing clients, but new clients, were when they went even though we were frontline, we did actually have some of our teams work from home. Challenge with that, when you are doing case management and you live alone, you don't actually have the peer network that you need to support you through that. So what I had actually implemented was a catch up at 9:30 every morning, and the team come together every single morning. We might play Scrabble, or we might do, you know, different aspects of things, but it really was a welfare check every single morning whilst we were actually out of the office. I had one team who was working from the office, spread out amongst the entire office, who was the first reporting line for any domestic violence incidents that actually went through from New South Wales Police. And my youth team, that was a bit challenging. Department of Education actually cancelled anything that they considered non-essential, which in excursions and things like that, and bringing people onto a property which unfortunately included our Links to Learning program across New South Wales. So the challenge with that was more around the fact that they had time to review the program, they had time to work through stuff, they were working from home, but they actually get their energy from the youth that they work with, and they had challenges in themselves around noting that a number of the youth that they were working with were from disadvantaged backgrounds, they were disengaged. Home is not necessarily a safe place for a number of youth, and it certainly isn't necessarily a safe place for women, predominantly women we were dealing with who experienced domestic and family violence. So there's that whole conflicting aspect in regards to that, and working through, and whilst we're saying people were safe from COVID, they weren't necessarily safe, if for want of a better term, in that particular space. So for me, we didn't stay out of the office for a long period of time. We're out of the office from March, and we're back in the office by the 6th of July. Even though a lot of people within YWC, even though a lot of people were still working from home, but that period of time allowed for that, I suppose, immediate threat to pass, and then to implement some strategies to ensure that people had the peer support that they needed, and not just virtually. There's very much a big difference between virtual communication and working in an office environment where you can just turn around and say to someone, oh, you know, this was difficult, or that was, you don't necessarily pick up the Teams chat or, you know, the phone or whatever and ring someone to actually have that conversation. So some lessons out of that, I think, and the psychological impact and the mental health impact on working in high pressure environments from a home environment is probably something to be looked at. For me personally, I still worked from home. I'm mum of 2 kids, wife, so that actually put, I think, more of a reliance on me. My family functions very well without me there. But when I'm there, they actually then rely, for some reason, revert back and rely on me. So where possible, I choose not to work from home, because from my perspective, it's actually easier for me to actually separate the two out. My husband owns a business, and then I think he thinks I'm his personal secretary when I'm actually at home. So it's a completely different dynamic. And that's the same working in emergency services. My preference is not to work from home, but is to actually work in the work environment. And part of that is the challenge of switching off. And in either of those two roles, working for a non-government organisation with that high impact of domestic and family violence, or working as an assistant commissioner for emergency services, you need to have time outside of the office environment and switch off. And for me, that whole definition is when you're driving from work to home, even though you might be on call and you may have to do some emails and things like that. But personally, I find it hard to switch off if I'm working from a home environment. I'll work 12 hours straight with no switch off time. So,
and I love Amanda's comment about
I don't wear my uniform. I don't wear a uniform at all, to be honest with you, except if I'm in a command role. So if I'm actually the state duty commander for whatever purpose, I'll wear a uniform. But other than that, I don't actually wear a uniform. My preference is not to wear a uniform.
Thank you. And it's interesting because both you and Sheri have really highlighted some of the inequalities and the exaggerated social ills that have come about through COVID. And I think that really leads really well into talking with Jamiee in her role with Red Cross. Jamiee, would you talk about that too, please?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kath. And may I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land in which I'm on in Brisbane here, the lands of the Yagara and the Turrbal people. I also wanted to acknowledge the incredible women on this panel. I'm just so chuffed to be a part of this with you all. I've been in disaster management and recovery for about 10 years now. And this past 12 months has been like anything I've ever experienced before. My experience previously is just disaster happens. Well, off you go and you deploy and you pack your bags and you get on a plane and you're off somewhere. And it's kind of COVID huge halt to that, didn't it, in terms of where we're able to go in a COVID safe environment. Just before the 2019-2020 bushfires, I had my second child, my son, and his name's Ted. So I was, watching as everyone was over the Christmas break, and later with horror as the fires were unfolding across the country, and harassed my Red Cross colleagues. Give me something to do. I'm on maternity leave. I'm desperate. Give me something to do. And so they were kind enough to let me come back to Red Cross, and I've got the greatest joyful job of leading the Disaster Recovery Advisor and Mentors Australia program, of which I want to acknowledge the wonderful Chris Newston there. She's one of my steering committee members and original mentors. And what we do in that position is use the professional and personal experience of those who have gone through a disaster and that recovery experience, and essentially pair them with people who are going through the disaster recovery process for the very first time. So it really is operationalizing the learnings of recovery and tangibly passing that knowledge and support down to people. So if I reflect on when I first came back off maternity leave in February last year, it was fine. I was happy to be working from home, which was a nice change, breastfeeding my son at the same time as writing reports and all that fun stuff. But in terms of how it affected our program, when the restrictions and things really started to happen in March, the Red Cross Recovery Program primarily has the idea of psychosocial support and really using those principles of connectedness, hope, social connection, etc., to really support communities. And so the biggest impact, as you can appreciate, that COVID presented for us was social connectedness. Would usually be Red Cross getting a barbie together and having a chat and understanding, and so it really put a spanner in the works. So we really had to transition to being more online and working with communities in terms of the resources that they had access to try and spread the word. So I also lead our Red Cross webinars, and we also use our disaster recovery advisors and mentors. We do virtual community rooms, so we would usually fly Chris out to a community and have a chat about some of the experiences or issues that they might be facing. We were actually having to transfer, weren't we, Chris, entirely to an online process. But equally, it also provided opportunities for us. So we were, because we were able to record those sessions and put them up online, it allowed people to come back in their own time to actually review some of those connections. And as a result, we've had over, I think it's about 9,500 views of some of our webinars that have gone across the country, and they've been primarily to support communities around themes that would be important in terms of what you're likely to expect in the timings. So we've had the wonderful Dr. Rob Gordon, and congratulations on his recent OAM, and others like Chris Newton and Anne Leadbeater with their experience, talk to communities in an environment like this, being able to answer questions that community have. In addition, looking to build the capacity of the supporters in communities, so some local government workers, community service organisations, and building their capacity. Because ultimately, when our trainings in person have been not able to occur, again, we transition to online. It's not ideal. It's always wonderful being able to meet in person and have a chat, and but we work with what we've got. But again, in terms of how it's COVID has affected my role and balanced my responsibilities, it's been a massive challenge trying to manage 2 children under 3. But it could be worse. So I'm just lucky to have the support of my steering committee and the broader Red Cross. And can I just say, nanas are the best. Between my mum and my mother-in-law, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine trying to do it without them. And a really great husband as well.
It's really appropriate, isn't it, to talk about the broader circle of women around us in an all conversation. Thank you. Charmaine, what do you see as the impact of COVID on your role or roles?
So my workload's increased exponentially. So I've got a significant background in infectious diseases outbreak. I spent 9 months in West Africa during the 2014-2015 Ebola epidemic. So I feel like I'd been around this block before. And I think from a volunteer perspective, I've completely disengaged in that space because I can't afford the risk of having extensive contact chains given the nature of my paid work. So I've had a few roles over the past 18 months since COVID arrived, and initially I was the clinical lead for establishing GP respiratory clinics across Western Australia. So when most of the country was locked down, I was out driving thousands of kilometres, establishing testing facilities to improve our testing capability across WA. So that was quite an exciting project for me. And I got exposed to quite a few different women in regional areas that had some interesting struggles with COVID. Not actually having COVID, but the restrictions on their working conditions. More recently, I've been the Commonwealth Clinical First Responder for Aged Care COVID response. So I've got Western Australia and South Australia. So that role is providing immediate support to facilities impacted by COVID. And that, like during an outbreak, that involves sort of a rapid assessment of the facility and working with all the stakeholders to determine what's required in response, and then maintaining that sort of optimal care of residents, and then providing support and oversight to a deployed workforce, which could be clinical and non-clinical workforce, cooks, cleaners, the works. But also the stuff I'm more passionate about has been working in that preparedness space where I can go out and provide support visits to facilities and do simulation scenario testing of outbreak management plans and just exercise those plans in the facility with the staff. I'm primarily working from home and outreach from here. My daughter's 21 and I missed her 21st birthday in person, but I'm quite fortunate in that I don't have young children to care for, which gives me that flexibility to respond. So I'm on call 24/7 and could be sent anywhere in the country. Yeah.
Charmaine, thank you. I just think just with the 4 women we've heard speaking, how on earth could COVID have been managed in Australia without you 4? And all from such different perspectives. What I'd like to do is ask you.
Can I just interrupt for a second and just say, And there's Charmaine saying to me, I'm really sorry I haven't been doing much, leading the OR chapter in Western Australia. I think we can all let her know right now that you are absolutely forgiven.
Thank you.
Yeah, too true, Amanda. What I'd like to do is ask each of you to think about what your workplaces have done to address the impact on staff, and we've had already some talk about that, or what you wish workplaces had done, or what you wish you had done in providing for staff through COVID. And then after that, I think there's so many other people here who want to ask a question. So please consider typing one in the chat, or when we go through all four, Charmaine, Nicole, Jamiee and Sheri, then let's see what other questions come out. It's a great opportunity. So let's go the same order. Sheri, what do you think workplaces should and could do to support staff?
Yeah, sure. Great question, Kath. Look, like many other public servants in Victoria, I've been working from home since March last year. I've been in the office mostly just when Parliament's sitting, to be honest, but most of my staff haven't been in the office since March last year. Very quickly, I think during we created our own economic stimulus in Victoria in terms of moving stand-up desks and chairs and computers and printers and you name it out to people's homes, and making sure that they're ergonomically set up to be able to work from home, given that we're in for the long haul down here in Vic. Look, a couple of things that I think have been really successful in Victoria is looking at how we create workspaces that we don't go into things alone very often, even though we may be alone in our home. We've tried to buddy up people in high stress jobs. So for example, when I was in the state commander role for those high risk accommodation settings, I had a legal buddy with me who would just document my legal decisions because of the nature of the detention orders that we were issuing. But I also had a meeting buddy, if you like, so someone who can come with me to take notes and to document when I was participating in meetings. So that was really helpful, just because it was 15, 16 hours of back-to-back sort of meetings, you lose track along the way. So having that buddying, and then having a twinning arrangement where I was doing 4 long days and then 3 days off with a twin coming in to do that. Unfortunately though, for all the great plans, given the kind of pressure on the Victorian Public Service, not all of our twins stuck, and given if I can just talk really colloquially to this group, my job was shit. Like, I was having to issue detention orders for people who couldn't comply because they were mentally unwell, because they were addicted, because they were not coping, as many of us weren't coping. And that's quite a difficult job, to be issuing some of those detention orders, going into high risk accommodation settings that were not always safe, not always healthy places to be, and locking down rooming houses or locking down supported residential units. So unfortunately, I had about 8 twins. The longest any twin lasted was 5 days before they decided it wasn't for them. So, while it's great, it's a great system to have, there is an opportunity, I think, to start to rest some of those more demanding roles. I think that makes it a little difficult for people. One of the things I started doing is early on in COVID, we had lots of, because I fund in my normal day job when I'm not locking down rooming houses, fund the homelessness service system. So we actually had quite a lot of industrial relations disputes with our funded agencies, and putting that through Fair Work Australia can make industrial relations really drag on. And given we were in a health emergency, we needed to resolve those disputes very quickly. So we introduced we had a retired QC who would come in and help to mediate with myself. I just found, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm actually in my bedroom right now. So I've spent, a year and a half in my bedroom, and having it, shouting men in an industrial relations dispute in your bedroom, it's not nice. Shouting in your bedroom, it's not lovely at all. So I ended up going out to the car that was just parked in the backyard, and with my laptop and having some of those meetings in the car. And if they were particularly yucky meetings, I run the car around the block a few times with all the windows down just to air it out. But they were the kind of meetings that when you had a buddy up, you had someone to then be able to debrief what was going on in that meeting, or the impact that you were feeling from that. So, yeah. But that said, lots of really good things that have come out of hybrid meeting. And I have now some staff who work full-time for me, but they now live in Perth. During the midst of COVID, I'd meet with a minister on 8 o'clock at night, and I'd say, "Oh, Minister, I'll knock up a full report. You'll have it by the time you're eating your breakfast tomorrow." And he'd say, "Oh, Sheri, don't work overnight." I'd say, "Minister, that's fine," because I had a staff member over in Scotland that got locked down in Scotland. So he'd work overnight and get a report done for me, and I'd have something in the morning. So, there were some great things that came out of that.
Oh, what an experience.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ruth, isn't it? Because I think, Sheri, you're giving us some insight into just how, when you talk about it, it sounds like, oh, yeah, you managed through all of these. But these are really serious issues, and especially that information about your twins. And it's interesting because I think, Nicole, you raised the peer support thing too. So what do you think workplaces have done? What have you done? What should be done? What could be done?
I think that there's probably some stuff in regards to reintroduction back into the workplace. So for me, in New South Wales SES, we predominantly have all our staff working out of buildings now. There is flexible work agreements, but we've got the added complexity should we have a nice flood that occurs or a severe storm, that we've got to actually be able to have an adequate operational response. Whilst some of that stuff can be done virtually, there is a lot of stuff that is much better placed in a face-to-face operational context type of environment to be able to respond adequately to the community. So that's always a consideration for us. So I think transition back into the workplace from a social perspective, some of the things that have actually come out, whether or not that was in YWCA or here in SES, is that people now actually experiencing anxiety about having to go back into the workplace. And we need to actually work through that with people and provide them with that level of support. We're a much luckier position than Victoria here in New South Wales. So we haven't had the number of lockdowns and the aspects as what has actually occurred in Victoria. So that's a real positive for us and working through that. But I think virtual, one of the benefits, I suppose, that has come out of COVID is most certainly that virtual communication. And there are a lot more virtual meetings that actually occur. The challenge with virtual meetings, there's benefits for that, but a lot of the conversation and decisions actually get made outside of a meeting. I don't know if everyone is aware of that. You have a conversation before a meeting, or you have the conversation after the meeting, and then you pick up on things and you actually go, oh, okay, maybe we can do that. And it takes it to those meetings being done virtually. As soon as they are cut off, they're cut off. You don't have that chit chat. You don't have that whole component of what else is going on. It's stuck. So there are some benefits there, but there are also some aspects that we're actually missing out on in regards to that. I think perhaps in high critical environments and noting the twin stuff that Sheri was talking about, and we did have stuff in place, and we also in the social worker roles, there's also clinical supervision, and there's a whole range of other things that happen in that space. But I think we've also got to weigh up the social context and the need for socialisation, as well as the need to isolate for spread of virus. And again, New South Wales is in a very different position to Victoria. So that being the case, there's obviously different risks associated with that and working through that. But I think we've really got to weigh up the much broader risk as well in regards to that mental health aspect moving forward post this. It's not just about the spread of the virus, it's about the much broader social impact that actually occurs across the space. And we certainly have to get back into that particular space. But predominantly with people working back out of offices and things like that, there has been, some people have experienced a level of anxiety about coming back into a work environment, even though we have all the checks in place. We've got, you know, permanent sanitising stations and a whole range of other things in place. The other aspect too, I think in New South Wales that we've really got to look at is I do believe there's probably a level of complacency now around COVID, and because we haven't had the same level of outbreaks as what's occurred in some of the other states, so of recent. So that means that if something does happen, it's likely to spread pretty quickly. But they're the sorts of things that we just need to keep in mind so that we don't actually have that level of complacency.
No, great, thank you. And both Sheri and Nicole have talked about paid staff. Jamiee, can you come in here and think about, if you'd like to, about volunteers and what could workplaces do, or what has your workplace done to support people?
Yeah, thanks heaps, Kath. So Red Cross, very early on, when COVID became apparent that it was going to affect the entire organisation, it was going to affect Australia-wide as a national organisation, we had to really think about how we were going to be supporting our workforce in a COVID-safe way that meant that we were essentially meeting the standards of safety that we needed to. Some of the, I guess, activities that our volunteers do, we don't have the luxury from doing it all from home. So we had people who were still in relief centres who were actually out in the community delivering food drops, in the Victorian community as well. So when they had a lot of people locked down, they were working side by side with Victorian Food Bank, actually out in community delivering that. So there was a broad project that happened which incorporated sort of 4 key aspects, which was keeping our people safe. It was around workforce well-being and making sure that people were keeping well throughout this pandemic, building the capacity and capability of our workforce during the pandemic, and also that given one of our key responsibilities is psychosocial support and recovery messaging, those were sort of the 4 aspects that we took on board. So with that project in particular, we were making sure that there were check-ins for our volunteers and making sure that we'd also procured the necessary PPE to ensure that our teams were safe on the ground, and also educating our volunteers as to how to be safe. There was some advice that, you know, if people weren't their health they weren't well, essentially, that they were under no obligation to obviously volunteer. It was up to them. So there were also opportunities for us to transition some of the work. So what happened with some of our teams across the country is that we were supporting those residents in hotel quarantine, and so Red Cross was actually asked to do the wellbeing checks on people in quarantine. And I mean, you know, Nicole and Sheri have made that perfect point about social connectedness. And again, coming back to the, you know, the principles of psychosocial support, it meant so much to people that they were hearing from another voice on the phone, asking them if they're okay, you know, seeing if they were, had all the things that they needed. Because what was actually becoming apparent was, you know, it was a bit of a novelty the first, second, third day being in hotel quarantine, but by the 8th day, people were really getting really agitated and not in a good space. So it made all the difference to have our Red Cross volunteers being able to call them, you know, to also be feeding that. You know, sometimes it was the only point of contact those individuals had had for some time, and feeding that intel back to the managing agencies to say, well, and advocating for some of the needs of those individuals. So, I mean, gosh, there's been so much. It's provided opportunities, but also significant challenges. Those that were working on the front lines don't have the luxury necessarily to be working from home, but what Red Cross did was put the systems and processes in place to make sure that they felt safe and their well-being was looked after.
Thanks, Jamiee. Charmaine, there's a question in the chat box from Chris about how well placed you think we are for the next epidemic to hit in terms of preparation, systems change, supply chains, etc. You can choose your own adventure. Would you like to address that question, or would you like to also answer that one about what workplaces might be able to do?
Oh, I could do a bit of both, perhaps.
Thank you.
I guess in terms of what workplaces can do, for those sort of clinicians and non-clinical staff on the front line responding to COVID outbreaks, you know, this is shift work, and there's been a real issue around childcare, and also staff concerned that they would take the virus home. So, you know, they've still got to go to work, and they felt a duty to go to work. But then, you know, we're really concerned that they would, you know, infect a vulnerable member of their family or their children. So certainly seen some people refusing to work on those grounds. But those who did choose to work were, you know, employing all these strategies to minimise the risk of potential transmission. So I remember one woman who worked in Kalgoorlie. So she worked in a GP respiratory clinic, and she worked in an emergency department. So often in these regional areas, health workers are, they're hard to find, and they'll work multiple positions. So that in itself is a risk. But she had set up a shower in her front yard, and she would come home from work, strip off, have a shower, and then go into the house to minimise that risk. I certainly saw cases where people were connecting the caravan up in the front yard and just isolating themselves from their family and living in a separate building to minimise the risk, or dividing the home in half and not wanting to cross that line, you know, actually isolating themselves physically from other family members. So that was quite an interesting thing to witness. I guess for the question about, what was it, the future and our preparedness around that, I think we're still pretty vulnerable, mainly due to our complacency, but we have not felt the true impact of this pandemic, notwithstanding the experiences that certainly Victoria has been through. You could see certainly with multiple impacts in small outbreaks in one state, how overwhelmed the system was. You know, we're deploying teams from all over the country. I mean, you replicate that in multiple states, in a health system that's already running pretty lean. It would be very difficult times, and certainly what we see in other countries, I feel we would see here. Yeah.
And you've had that experience working with Ebola, haven't you, Charmaine? So yeah, it's a really interesting point. So would anyone like to jump in and ask a question? We've got 15 minutes. I'm really particularly interested in questions that we've been talking generally, but this is the Australasian Women in Emergencies Network. So I'd be really interested in questions around women. We've got some in the chat box as well, but does someone want to unmute and ask a question?
I'll pop in and just at the moment while people are thinking. I've just typed a message and noticed some of my typos, but thinking we're going to need to keep in mind when we do come back together after this extended period with a range of quite intense and profound experiences, that people will have changed. They will have perhaps different life views. They may have changed the priority of things that are important to them. They may, in fact, have developed different styles of relating. They may be in a different psychological or emotional space. So when people come together, they won't be exactly the same person who was there before the shutdown. So there will be a need to provide the space within the environment, but with each person within themselves to get to know each other again. because often we can see that tensions will arise after such an event that has caused people to develop, to change, to have a new worldview. And that can cause those frictions and tensions that we often see in a disaster community. And I'm not sure how much that's actually being thought about in terms of the workplaces regrouping again. Yeah.
It's interesting, Ruth, because Anne Pickles put on the chat that people will be worried about public transport in a way they never were before. Would someone else like to, in particular, thinking about women and the long-term consideration about the COVID recovery? Bridget, what are you thinking?
So, yeah, I will. I'm just going to add quickly to what Ruth said. You know, I've really observed that some people have really thrived working from home, and I'm one of them. Whereas other people, I think the more extroverted among us are probably the ones itching to get back into the office. And certainly when we reopened our offices, they were first in line to head back into the city and be amongst the hustle and bustle of it and be with their colleagues and their friends. So it's interesting. I think people will respond differently. I guess one of the things I'm really interested in is, you know, what does the experience of COVID, and particularly the experience of working from home, mean for women moving forward, and in terms of how they balance their families? I know that for a lot of women in our office, it's just a matter of popping out at 3 o'clock to pick up the kids and you can be back in the meeting at 3:30. Whereas previously it was, you know, an hour's train ride to pick up the kids and you had to finish your working day and therefore you weren't earning an income. And so I think there are massive opportunities here for women in particular.
And possibly a risk that there'll be a divide will start to develop between those who are in the office and those who aren't, or between women's roles and men's roles. So it might actually exacerbate some of the old stereotypes and career opportunities as well.
Margaret, you're thinking?
I was interested in that as well, Ruth. I'm thinking, and I think there'll be a whole complexity of consequences depending on your circumstances. So the national principles for recovery they're always in my mind in the work that I do. And I'm thinking we have to be careful to understand and recognise the complexity of consequence. I know some, for example, my son and his partner have had a child through this whole experience, conceived and delivered under COVID. And he's already feeling a potential sense of loss and grief when he can't be at home. And he's set up his workplace so that he works quite a long day. But when he pops out for lunch or he goes to the loo or he's finished his day, within 1 minute, he's able to look at his bub. And that's not going to be the case.
Yes.
And likewise, his partner will have a very long day looking after her baby that she isn't currently having to do alone. There's no travel time. But I know for other families, their homes are not as safe. And so that's a consequence. I'm wondering whether I've already noticed in my work, the blurring of I'm always available because I'm always at home and I'm online, and people will ring at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And if they're working, they assume I'm working. And actually, that's always the case when you're a small business, because you're working, or when you work from home, you have to manage that boundary. But I think that may get harder to defend for more people. And I wonder about whether men's roles and women's roles in work are going to shift. And again, I suspect it depends. For so many of these things, it's just going to be, well, it depends. Some men will be doing more domestic work and some women will be doing more domestic work. It's really interesting, isn't it? And
it's a bit like the theme that I think's come through, that
trying to do everything.
Yeah, that COVID has put the spotlight on people who are experiencing a vulnerable time, and the vulnerable have become more vulnerable. And maybe it's also the same with staff and people in work roles. Any other question? We've got time for maybe one.
just a thought, again, learning from history, if we go back to the Second World War, where because the men were away fighting, the women had to come in and were working in heavy industry, doing all sorts of jobs that had been the role of men. After the Second World War, after the war ended, women were taken sort of back into their earlier roles, domestic roles, and we got the stereotype of the woman at home with her apron and lovely cakes and all the rest of it, and the men out in the world. And although there have been opportunities through COVID for women to redefine their roles, I think as a group of women, we could well do us a lot of good to be mindful that there could be actually that pushback that we have experienced through other upheavals in society as people want to move back into stereotypes. So there's still some powerful forces trying to hold women in their place in the home. So as a group of women, I think it could well be important for us to be mindful that we don't actually lose some of the gains that we've achieved. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Ruth. That's really wise, isn't it? And I was just reading yesterday that 44% of Queen's Birthday honours went to women this year, 44%, which is the highest ever, and it's been steadily increasing. But it's still not 51%. So I think that's really important to think about the gains may slip back in all sorts of ways. Thanks, Ruth. Just as we finish, what I'd love to do is hear from each of our speakers one last time. This is your chance to tell us whatever you think in terms of this conversation and women and the impact on women in emergencies, particularly as a result of COVID. So let's go in the same order again. Sheri, this is your chance.
Sure. I guess I don't have 10 years, unlike Jamiee, I don't have a decade in emergency management. I'm a social worker. I'm homelessness and housing background. And very quickly last year, I found myself working in an emergency management structure. And can I tell you, you people are not easy to work with. From an outsider coming in, you've got every alphabet under the sun covered in your acronyms. I had no idea what anybody was talking about for a very long time. It's a hard sector to come to parachute into and land into and understand, it's very governance heavy. And from a social worker who likes to share my point of view, there'll be none of that. It's a command and control structure. So for an outsider coming in, I actually found the culture shock quite difficult. Given that I came in the middle of an emergency, I picked it up pretty quickly. But what I did find is that the people who I went to and who coached me and mentored me and helped me learn the ropes very quickly while I was falling off the ropes were the women. They were the ones that I reached out to, and they were so generous with their time, with their expertise, with their mentoring, with their coaching, and helped me come up to speed very quickly in trying to navigate my way very quickly with a high degree of authority through a service system I had no idea how it worked. So, so I think that they're the moments that stand out for me last year, is the kindness and the generosity to which the women in emergency services took me in and brought me up to speed really quickly. So that's one of the resounding memories of last year for me.
Oh, thanks, Sheri. And that's so much within the purpose and objectives of the Australasian Women in Emergencies Network. And as you were talking, I was thinking about women coming into the space as a career and how much support they get from other women. And it's just formalised in this network. So thank you. Nicole, what would you finish off for?
Well, I'll just pick up on the thread that Sheri was just talking about, being in emergency services for 15 years. I think it depends on who the commander is as to how strict they are with command and control, most certainly, and perhaps even the agency. But certainly working in emergency services builds your resilience, I can tell you that. And there's a range of challenges that sort of comes with that. And I suppose going back to Queen's Birthday Honours and the like, just have a look at how many women in emergency services actually got stuff. And I know we've done a quick scan, and not many in the number of the fire agencies or even the flood agencies, emergency service agencies did even nominate women across the board. So that's certainly an area that we've got to work through. I think like anything, COVID, floods, whatever, I suppose my last leading thought is that the movement of the community so quickly into a prevention space in all of the time I've been in emergency services, COVID was the quickest that the community, in my view, has moved into a space to prevent the spread. They don't necessarily move into a prevention space for flood or fire as quickly, in my experience, but certainly with COVID. And I don't know if it was the way it was delivered or, how the impact that they were seeing overseas or that whole direct aspect in regards to that. But I think that the community moved extremely quickly into that prevention space, which is a positive.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. And Jamiee, what would you finish with?
Yeah, I would also touch on Sheri and Nicole's points about the connectedness, and it's been, I can't tell you, just brilliant being a part of this network and community of women who have gone through their own trials and tribulations through a really trying time. COVID, as I said at the very beginning of the piece, is unlike anything we've all experienced, but we're all experiencing it. So it has been really powerful to call upon the skills experience of other women in the network to say, hey, I'm just having a bit of a tough time, can we have a quick chat? And it goes back to Ruth's point around whilst COVID has provided a flexible arrangement and opportunities for us to be working from home, what it does take away from is those opportunities just to connect, that you're not talking about work, and that's, I think, where the beauty comes from in terms of building trust and bonding with your colleagues and, becoming more than just people working on a project. It's and that, I think moving forward, there needs to be a balance, and people will determine what their own balance looks like, but I still think it's that connectivity to build those relationships is just so underestimated, but so necessary. And I would also just make the point about what Sheri was saying is just to be kind and acknowledge that we're going to have to be holding space for one another coming back, and we're all having normal reactions to an entirely abnormal event. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jamiee. Charmaine.
For me, I guess I've never seen an outbreak so politicised before, and I'd like to think that we'll always treat the virus and the people first before the politics. Probably my lasting impression.
Yeah, good one to finish off. Just in terms of, our time's finished, and just a couple of the things I've written down, the themes that are coming through for me. The first one was shine a light and how the inequalities in society are really highlighted with COVID and the impact of it. There was a lot of talk about the isolation, both for paid staff and individuals in difficult times, and the need for relationship building and also some transitioning back focus. If we do transition back to something that's the same, probably not. And then I think that lovely focus on kindness and holding space for each other and supporting of women, particularly in this space in particular. So listen, thank you so much, everyone. And we're having another oral conversation next month. And we've had our winter network catch up, but we'll have other ones, and the newsletter's coming out, and there'll be lots of really good things in there. So thank you so much for jumping on tonight, and we'll see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, ladies.
Lovely.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Kath.